Hello, this year sees the 30th anniversary of the Kinesiology Federation, and to mark the occasion, we are speaking to people who were there at the beginning of the Federation, people who have been associated with it, and other people from the wider world of kinesiology. I'm Phil Clubley, I'm the current chairperson of the Kinesiology Federation, and it's my pleasure today to be speaking with Jeremy Glyn. Jeremy was there at the very beginning of the Kinesiology Federation. He was one of the founding members and is still contributing and joining in with what we're doing as an honorary fellow member of the Kinesiology Federation. So hello, Jeremy, how are you doing?
Good morning, I'm fine, thank you, Phil. Nice to talk to you.
Yes, you too, and it's nice to have a bit of sunshine as well.
It's beautiful here, absolutely beautiful. My only regret is that I'm not outdoors, but this is well worth doing, so I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, we'll make it well worth doing. So I was thinking earlier on before we spoke that one of the very first conferences I went to, it may have been even the first conference, you were one of the first speakers of the day, and you did this this amazing demonstration where you paired us all up and we had to look at the person we were paired with, and take in their appearance and then turn around and change something about our appearance, turn back around and try and work out what had changed. And we did that, and it was all good fun. And you said, well, the demonstration's over, and we all rushed to put ourselves back together as we had been before. And you said that we'd been very good. We'd followed every instruction that you'd given us to the letter, apart from you had not told us to put ourselves back together. And it just illustrated how quickly we all felt we needed to get back into our comfort zone. And, you know, I thought it's fascinating, isn't it, how we are so quick to constrict our world.
Anybody listening to this and thinking it might be worth playing, what you actually did was to change 3 things about your appearance.
Is it 3 things? I remember taking my glasses off.
And I've done it all over the world in lots and lots of situations. It's the best demonstration I know of how we just instinctively get back into our comfort zone if circumstances take us out of it.
Yeah,
and in the work we do, that's, you know, trying to help people change. It's very relevant that they understand that.
Yeah, and that's really stayed with me. It was a fascinating demonstration. so before kinesiology, if you can remember a time when you weren't muscle testing, what was life for you?
Oh, well, that's easy, because I didn't come across muscle testing until I was probably nearly 40. The world immediately before that, I hardly dare mention it because the species is not much loved. I was a residential estate agent. Ooh, yeah. I'd done a very brief stint in the city, and that didn't suit me. I didn't think it wasn't enough about people and so on and so forth. And I got very lucky. I was offered a job by friend, got me an offer of a job in a company called John D. Wood and Company in the country house department. And they are hugely respected in that world at that time. And it's strange to hear now, given that you've got offices all over the country, but the leading country residential estate agent, namely John D. Wood and Company, had an office in Berkeley Square, full stop.
Nice.
We covered the whole of England from Berkeley Square. So it didn't take me very long to work out that I'd be spending a good deal of time getting in my car and driving through beautiful countryside to go and see beautiful houses with beautiful pictures and probably nice furniture, and spend quite a long time driving back to London. I wouldn't spend much time on my backside in the office at all, which suited me rather well. And that was great fun for a while, but it got a bit slow. I won't bore you with why. So I got to know the London residential bosses very well, and overheard that one of the offices was going to be expanded, therefore they need more people. So I did, the first time in my life, I did an Oliver. I did it again another time. So I want some more. I don't like this. I want to be in the extended London office, please, Chelsea office. And that found me some friends for life. Again, wonderful time, wonderful training. I ended up managing the head office, and then thought, enough of this. If I'm not careful, I'll be sitting in this chair for 35 years. And I went and started my own business for the partner. So, and I'd done that until the mid 80s, and then decided to leave that. And it was time to sort myself out, because circumstances had led me to be introduced to a fabulous Scottish counsellor. He'd made me aware that there was quite a lot going on in here that wasn't very healthy. and had been for a long time. And my shoulders were up around my ears, and my ribs sort of locked somewhere up here, and I was very unrelaxed and very unconfident, and very all sorts of like very undesirable sort of mental states, which didn't show on the outside, because if you're tall and you've got a deep voice, you can sort of get away with all sorts of things and hide things. And so I went into the therapy world. I started with massage and aromatherapy and reflexology, and I found all them fascinating. But strangely enough, it didn't satisfy me, and I sort of progressed to working on slightly more, getting me slightly better balanced and better sorted out. And I was, one of my massage patients took me to see a man called Brian Butler, a name you will have heard of, who was Europe's #1 kinesiologist. And at that age, if I didn't understand why something worked or how something worked, I didn't really believe, I wasn't satisfied that it did work.
Okay.
And he had about 15 or 20 of us in a semicircle, and he asked for a volunteer who had a emotional stress they'd like dealt with. And this lady stepped forward, and to everyone's astonishment, and to a degree horror, certainly in my case, she explained that the reason she stepped forward was that, and the tears began flowing and the voice began trembling, about 5 or 6 years before, she'd been walking down along a pavement in London with a child who I think was 5 or 6 at the time, holding her hand, but the child was walking on the street side of the pavement, not the shop side of the pavement, and he'd stepped off the pavement and been flattened by a bus. And we just sat there, and the voice had gone and the tears were there. And we thought, dear God, I mean, it's not fair in a circumstance like this to present an issue as major as that to be dealt with to this guy, Brian. And Brian didn't turn a hair. And he did some very simple ESR and 1 or 2 other clever bits and pieces. And about 15 or 20 minutes later, she could talk about the incident as calmly as I'm talking to you. Yeah. It was jaw-dropping stuff. And at the time it was, I have no idea how it's possible to do that, but that is absolutely wonderful. If you like, I had minor stresses and things, and I knew, was aware of all sorts of people who'd been in my environment over the years by then who had all sorts of emotional dramas of one kind or another, or memories that were haunting them, and I thought, what a wonderful thing this is, I'm going to find out more about it. And that was my introduction to kinesiology. Oh,
fascinating. Yeah, that's an incredibly sort of pertinent and an emotive story. Yeah. So that was your sort of first introduction. What made you then want to be a practitioner? Were you a practitioner? Because I know that with your Pathfinders company, you work a lot with sporting people and dyslexia and sort of learning.
Well, okay, well, I've confused you or Bettina a little bit there, perhaps. Because I was interested in it, I signed up for Touch for Health, to be the Touch for Health classes. I went right through the Touch, gobbled them up as fast as I could go, and pretty quickly moved on to the facilitator training. And I was finding it all fascinating. And Brian was telling us, very good. He was a very good teacher, and he was good at sort of getting us to look ahead at what we might want to do, if you like, as any good sort of teacher and salesperson does. And he was flagging the fact that his mentor in America, a man called Gordon Stokes, had created a branch of kinesiology called 3-in-1 concepts. And Brian was explaining that he was going to go to the States for 6 weeks and come back as a fully qualified facilitator of 3-in-1. And what intrigued him about that was that he'd heard, amongst other things, that approach to kinesiology would be very beneficial to people with dyslexia.
Right.
Well, no one's told me ever that I've got dyslexia, but when I was 17, they realized that something went very wrong between my eye and my brain. And I say eye because I've only got really one that works. And for the last year I was at school, I carried a piece of paper saying that I could show you any master I wanted, saying they had to accept poor work or no work at all until further notice. And at one level I was the envy of my schoolmates, but it wasn't actually a very clever piece of paper to be carrying in your A-level year. And something clearly was going on that still goes on. I have great trouble reading. If I got to absorb facts off a great wedge of paper, that's still not a good idea. So I thought, help me with dyslexia. Yes, I'd probably get more satisfaction from that than to put it bluntly, sort of helping people with aches and pains, and which is what you were doing, what I thought I was doing when I started doing Touch for Health. And so again, at the end of the facilitator training, or part of the way through the facilitator training of Touch for Health, I did an Oliver again. And I said, please, sir, I want some more. He said, what do you mean? I said, I'd like to come to the States with you and for 6 weeks. And he said, well, okay, I'll ring up Gordon and see what he says. And Gordon chatted to him a bit about, did Brian think I was up to it or good enough, or got the sort of basics enough to step up to that level? And Brian said, yes, I thought so. And I went. And Brian and I spent 6 weeks in the States, and we came back having had a wonderful time. It was particularly good for me because I'd just been dumped by the love of my life. I was convinced I was going to marry. She left me for a man she's now blissfully happy married to, so it was a good step for her. And funny enough, they live very close, and I still see them, and they're good, very good friends. But I was therefore in quite an emotional state when I went over there. I got so much balancing done. It was very, very good time for me to be there.
These things often happen when they're supposed to happen.
And to my amazement, on the way back, Brian said, well, that was all very interesting, but I'm not interested in working with this emotional stuff. It's all yours.
Okay.
And he was such a good teacher. I thought, good heaven. And there was I, the first person in Europe qualified to teach 3-in-1 concepts. So I began teaching and had a wonderful time. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. And that was where I started working with the dyslexics. And certainly, oh my goodness, I could talk a lot about how wonderful kinesiology can be for someone with dyslexia, but that's another story perhaps.
No, tell us a little.
Well, I wish I'd thought ahead to this, because I have in my desk a mini tape recorder. And quite early on in my days of doing the dyslexia work, a brother and sister came to me who were probably about 6 and 8 years old, and they didn't read. Because if they tried to read, they just went syllable by syllable, and they couldn't read, either of them. And I've done this since it's only failed once with a 5-year-old. I've done it with so many people, last time with a 30-year-old lady. And I took them through the very basic, but then I'd done some educational kinesiology and other things as well. And there's a very simple correction in EK to help people with reading. Rubbing some points, rotating your eyes and saying the alphabet. All it is, trying to get the right points. And I got the children, I explained to the children potentially what I was going to do. And it just happened. I recorded each of them trying to read from Winnie the Pooh. And they were going syllable by syllable. And that's on the tape. So for each of them, I just did this very simple correction. And as you know, you reverse the hands, reverse the polarities, and do it again. And I recorded them again. And the little boy went first, from memory. And he read completely fluently.
Wow.
And in the middle, you hear him whispering, I don't believe this. And then the girl read completely fluently. But not only completely fluently, she put on a different voice for the different characters she was reading.
Wow.
Wow. And just, I mean, if you said to me, okay, of all the people who've helped, blah, 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 is there sort of one area of correction that's stuck with you is that really, I think it would be that correct, giving that correction to someone who can't read. I say the last person I did was a 30-year-old lady on a workshop. And the tutor asked her to read from the manual, and she just quietly said, I don't read. So I went up to her in the interval and said, I might be able to help. We went off in the garden, and half an hour later, she was reading.
Wow. And
I saw her on a follow-up workshop 3 months later, and she rushed up saying, I don't know how to thank you. Because I explained they needed to do this exercise on a sort of ongoing basis to sort of connect things up together. And she rushed up to me 3 months later, I don't know how to thank you. I'm hoovering up books and magazines and newspapers. And I said, oh, that's great. How often do you do the exercise? She looked very puzzled. She said, what exercise? She'd never needed to do it again.
Oh, that's incredible.
Once she'd read fluently, after 30 years of not, her brain was saying, oh, okay, I can read that, and just let her read.
It's amazing, isn't it? Because I think sometimes it's like the information's there, And it's almost just not having the tools or the skill to be able to either access that information or use that information coherently. And I sometimes think you find that with teachers as well. You can have a teacher and that they're trying to teach you something and it's not going in, it's not making any sense. And then you have another teacher and it all makes sense. But not only does it all make sense, but you've taken in what the other teacher has said, but you could never apply it. Speaking from experience here, and suddenly it's like, God, I know all this stuff, but now that it's being nurtured in the right way, I can actually make some use of it.
You're sending shivers down my spine. Have we got time for one more sort of dyslexic-ish story? I did spend a lot of time helping people with dyslexia, and it was a very important time. Just on the theme you're talking about, yes, it can be the effect of what one teacher says to you, and it can very, very much be the effect of what your peers and siblings and everyone else is saying to you. I sat next to a person next to me. Was so intrigued to learn I helped people with dyslexia because she had a very dyslexic son, and he was 12, and he'd been kicked out of 3 ordinary schools, and he'd been kicked out of 3 special schools, and he'd been branded unteachable, unmanageable, uncontrollable. It sort of made sympathetic noises. She said, well, you know, he's fed up with going to experts, he's been to every blah, 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 but you sound as if you're doing something different. Could you possibly bear to meet him? So we cooked up a story. I was a friend of hers and she invited me to tea, and we both talked very loudly about what I was doing when he was in the next room, and sure enough he came toddling in to listen to what was going on and said, could he have a session, please? Short story, short version. And he came to my clinic, which I had in London at the time, with his mother, thank goodness. And I explained that, trying to keep it short, if you need to hoover your house, but there's a fault in the hoover and it blows a fuse every 10 minutes, you can either take the hoover to a repair person or learn how to change a fuse and get lots of fuses. Either way, hopefully you can then hoover your house. And I said, in theory, I'm the repair person. I may be able to fix something. If I can't, I'll teach you how to change a fuse, metaphorically speaking, as far as your reading and work goes. So I balanced him for about an hour and a half with his mother in the room. Just a straightforward kinesiological balance. A bit of 3 and 1, you know, such health coming in, whatever it might be. And I said, okay, so let's do the fuse changing exercise, which was the same thing I'd done, as I described before. And when I got to the point of saying, you roll your eyes and say your alphabet, he said, I can't. And I said, what do you mean you can't? He said, I can't say my alphabet, I don't know it, I've never learnt it. Oh, whoops. No one told me he was that dyslexic. He was very bright, as dyslexics normally are. So I thought, well, I didn't want to damage his self-esteem. And I said, well, okay, just show me what you can do. And his mother's jaw dropped as he perfectly, metronomically, evenly, straight through from A to Z, said his alphabet without a pause. I thought, this kinesiology stuff's quite good. But the point of the story comes next. And I said, that was great. And he said, what was? I said, you just said your alphabet. Big smile on my face. He looked me straight in the eye and said, the strangest thing I've ever heard in my life yet. I couldn't have, I don't know it. Mm. And that's, I learned later in the work I went on to do and now do integrate into my balances, is something called cognitive dissonance. If we have a strong enough belief given us by a teacher, by a parent, by our siblings, by ourselves, perhaps most importantly, I'm so thick, I'm so stupid, I'm unteachable, I don't know my alphabet. If that belief is strong enough, our subconscious can deaden us to the reality that actually it's not true.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that with us.
I'm telling too many stories probably, but that's
not
triggered by what you said.
So how did this work then start to lead on to you thinking the world needed the Kinesiology Federation? Had you met the other founding members through training?
I was sort of course hungry. Yes, I'd done Touch for Health and trained to facilitate. Yes, I was a 3-in-1 facilitator. Became a Carol. I met at Touch for Health meetings. There was a thing called the Touch for Health something or other. Council, Touch for Health Committee. I can't remember what it was. A Brown Committee. I met all sorts of other kinesiologists, including Kay Carroll in particular. Comes to mind. Natalie Davenport, all sorts of lovely, lovely people. And my memory is that it was at one of these gatherings of all sorts of different kinesiologists that it was my memory that Kay was the first person I heard talking about that we needed a sort of coherent organisation, so to get us all thinking straight and working together and promoting ourselves collectively, all that sort of stuff. And I was just a sort of tiddly new boy at the time compared to someone like herself and Natalie and some of the others. So I just sat there and listened. And Daft Clark was around too, of course, and the Bognor Touch for Health, etc. And so conversations went on, a bit of mushing here, a bit of playing there. And then what we needed was a steering group to try and put the thing together. And I was gobsmacked when I was asked to be on it, and they were quite straightforward. So I was almost bluntly told, you don't know much about kinesiology yet, but you have started a business in the past, and we think that might be quite helpful.
We're nothing if not honest as kinesiologists.
I thought, okay, it's true, I did start a business myself, but I might be able to have some points in that direction. So I was on the steering group, and there were, I think, 6 or 8, I can't remember, the 6 or 8 on the steering group, whatever it was. And the role of that group was to sort of really sort of start feeling out, sounding out of the different kinesiologies around. It was Charles Benham, the lovely Charles Benham, had started his Optimum Health Balance by then. I can't remember, I hope I'm not offending anybody. My memory is not doing me justice in terms of all the other ologies that were around then, but there were 5 or 6 certainly by then, is my memory. And Brian Butler's work, of course, as well. And we were trying to bring these all together. And so we had these fun meetings around my kitchen table very often. And there was more coffee than alcohol drunk, I think, in fairness. It was all taken very seriously. And it was fascinating because one of the challenges was that each kinesiology had its step 1, step 2, step 3, just to keep it simple language, progress of becoming more and more qualified in their particular branch of their kinesiology. And that's fine, makes absolute sense. But the students were beginning to complain because if they'd done, let's say, Touch for Health, part 1, part 2, part 3, and they then came to Bloggin's kinesiology, they'd find that their part 1 was stuff they were so familiar with already, it really irritated them, and they were paying for perhaps a 2-day course of stuff they knew inside out already.
Yes.
So we got our head around this, and from that was where the sort of the basic kinesiology course came from, to try and remove this and get the different ologies to sort of restructure their training so that there could be one basic training, and after that would be additional stuff according what direction you were going along.
Brilliant.
And that was challenging, to say the least, actually. And for each, not every kinesiology was, British based. There were, so there were all sorts of issues, but it was fun doing it, and the outcome was a sort of united group, sadly without Brian Butler's ology in it, that found agreement in the areas we thought we needed to do, and the Federation got started, and that was great fun.
Brilliant. And it's still going.
Yeah, in fact, Daft Clark had chaired the subgroup, and I think because of my doing the business thing, I'd been made vice chair of the subgroup, but I've been the vice chair of anything in my life. And she and I worked well together, and so we were sort of the group that sort of formed it. But pretty much as I remember it, the official committee when we started it, and Daff and I were chair and vice chair. And okay, I lived in London, and people came from all over, and it was quite a convenient meeting place. So jammy me, I didn't have to get up at crack of dawn and get on a bus or a train and travel miles and miles and miles. I just, some of you may be living like this at the moment in the COVID days. I just sort of got out of bed. I mean, I did actually have to take my dressing gown off and take my pajamas off and get dressed, but much later than others had had to.
And I know everyone was paying their own travel then, so that must have been convenient.
Oh, and was it Christina used to come down from Scotland
on the overnight
people
train?
Traveled enormous, and someone Carrie, would she come up from Devon or something? I mean, it's enormous distances some people would travel.
Yeah, I spoke to Daphne. I think it was last week I was speaking with Daphne, And I think she used to have a little room in your house before the meetings.
I absolutely know. I had a spare room there that she could use. And it gave us the capacity to think through the next day's meeting.
Yes.
How we wanted it to go. And it was straightforward. And actually, you know, depending what the topic was, we sort of would sense that sometimes if I proposed it, that might be more digestible to the committee, and other things it might be better if DAF suggested it.
Yes.
So we would sort of think it through and work out how, as a pair, as a team, we would hopefully go about getting the best outcome.
Yes.
Or it might be a question of, okay, we need to raise this question. If we ask them first, we like to get a bit of flack. We ask them first, you know, it might sort of make things easier. So we did.
That's how kids.
Isn't that what you call planning a meeting? I think that's all right.
Yeah, that's how kids get around their parents, isn't it?
Oh, you see, I would.
Yeah, they find the weakest link. And so.
I have. Well, I think we're being a bit more constructive than that, but.
So with kinesiology and muscle testing, do you have a way that you can describe it in a nutshell? Because even people who've been doing it a long time can still go around the houses trying to explain what kinesiology is and how it can benefit someone. And so with your years of experience, do you have a one sentence approach to
I read yesterday that the longest sentence ever written was about 700 words. So in one sentence I could probably do
awesome. I'll get comfy.
I actually think that it's almost a confusion. I haven't thought this through, so I may not express it coherently. I think there are people out there who think kinesiology is muscle response testing and that muscle response testing is kinesiology. And I don't.
No.
They're completely different in my mind. What I try and explain to people, and it's very relevant to what I'm doing at the moment, is that muscle response testing is a tool or a technique, or call it whatever you like, that allows whoever is using it access to what is going on in the client's subconscious.
Yeah.
Gives them access to the client's subconscious aspirations of how they'd like their life to be. In that context, if you're doing what we call a goal balance, it gives the user of that tool access to what's going on in the client's subconscious that might be inhibiting their progress towards their aspirations. In the kinesiology world, going broader than goal balancing, it also gives the, let's say, the kinesiologist access to where the client system is out of balance and what would balance it. The client subconscious knows more about that than any external individual is going to.
Yeah.
And with this muscle response testing tool, the kinesiologist has access to that information. I don't know if I've answered your question.
I think you have. That was lovely.
But the balancing bit, I think, is important. I used to describe it as a blend of Eastern and Western medical thinking. And Eastern medical thinking, I think, is fascinating. It goes into the meridians and the chakras and all sorts of subtle energy things that most people, well, people now understand very much more than they did 35 years ago. Yeah. So now I would probably stress more about that, saying, you know, in terms of just our natural health, what kinesiology can do using the muscle response testing tool is access what's out of balance and rebalance it. The parallel is, I use motor cars a lot in my parallels. If your car needs a service these days, you go to a garage, they plug it into a computer, and the computer says, that's not working right, that's not working right, that's not working right, and the mechanic knows what to do to fix it.
Yeah.
It's a parallel with that.
Absolutely.
The muscle testing tool does that, that's not working, that needs tweaking. And the train can, and that will only be shown to the kinesiologist if the kinesiologist has the tools to change it. That's one of the clever bits.
Yes. And it's interesting because we were talking earlier on about, I can't think what the word is, but if we go into muscle testing with an idea of what we expect that response to be, then you know, we can override that. But the computer analogy is brilliant because the computer just sees it's just black and white. It's either the car needs this doing or it doesn't need this doing.
Yeah.
The computer isn't thinking, oh, I know what I'll have a look at. You know, it's actually just taking the information that's being offered. And I'd like you to tell us that story. Was it with Brian and getting everybody to pull the ear?
Oh, that one. Ah,
yeah.
No.
God, that was a good story.
Thank you. Yes. And that's something of bringing it up to date a little bit. Warning bells been going off in my head recently, listening to all sorts of people talking about kinesiology. And what they're, or not just kinesiology, talking about muscle testing, I suppose, because lots of other therapies are using muscle testing now. Some very, very good therapies using muscle testing now. And I hear people saying, isn't it interesting, particularly when they're working online in these current circumstances, you connect into the sort of energy of the client you're working with, and that's very good, and that makes sense, and it works very well, really well. And I've heard people saying, the more I do it, the more I kind of intuitively know what's going to come up that needs balancing, or I intuitively know what the correction is going to be that they need. And warning bells go off. And the story you want me to tell, which is so relevant to that, was when we were in the States. Brian and I were in the States, being trained by this totally brilliant teacher called Mistakes. I won't bore you with why he was so brilliant, but he was absolutely brilliant. And in the States in those days, I think the organization was called IARS, the International Association of Systematic Kinesiologists, very grown-up people. They all had to be chiropractors. And to be a member of that, you had to come up with a new bit of research every year. Okay. So we were sort of well through this training, and there were, I don't know, 20 or 24 of us, whatever it might have been. And Gordon came in one morning saying, I've got really interesting news for you. I've just been reading the latest sort of research out of one of the IARS members. Absolutely fascinating. And you understand what I mean, maybe not everyone watching the video well. If you test positive, pectoralis major clavicular muscle and it's strong, and you then tug your left earlobe, you'll get a weak test. Absolutely extraordinary. Why don't you have a go? He sort of said to the room at general. So 12 pairs of people stood up and began testing right pectoralis major clavicular strong, tug the earlobe. Goodness me. And we were all chattering away about this. Yeah, it's fascinating. No idea why that would be, but there was this grown-up researcher come up with this. So really tell us more, Gordon, please. And we sat down and Gordon said, how did that go? And there were about sort of 2 or 3 couples who were rather embarrassed. They said, well, it didn't work. What do you mean it didn't work? Well, we had a strong test. We pulled the earlobe and strong test. So I suspect the majority of the room began sort of sniggering and saying, well, they're obviously not very good at this, are they? And after a wonderful pause, Gordon said, congratulations. And the whole room sort of shut up. He said, it's nonsense. I just made it up. And everyone in the room was a very experienced kinesiologist. They were probably all already a facilitator of some other kind of kinesiology. We'd been taken in by our guru, our expert, who told us that an almost even bigger expert had come up with this research. And we were testing with a positive expectation that once we pulled the earlobe, we'd get a retest, and 80% of the room did.
Yes.
Woo! It taught me so much that it's vital to have absolutely no expectation of the outcome of the test.
Absolutely. You've got to take yourself out of it, haven't you?
But that was the story you asked me to say.
It was. Yeah, and I think that's a great story. It's fascinating.
When I hear people now saying, I intuitively now I know what they're going to ask for. I'm thinking, oh, be careful, be careful, be careful. Make sure you park that expectation before you do. That was it is intriguing how clever the balances can be. And I always say to a client, if they've got some private issue, very personal issue, I don't need to know what it is. They can say, is issue A, or we're focusing on something. Is it issue A, is it B? They've got 2 issues. I say, well, label one of them A, label one of them B. I'll say C is an extra one in case your subconscious wants to focus on neither of those and something different. And this particular client came to me, doesn't matter how or why, it's a lady, and she wanted to focus on something, and it was a personal one. So was it A or B? I said, think of each issue and give one of them A, one of them B. I don't need to know what it's all about. I'll just test, is it A, B, or C? And I told her, tested it, and it was issue B. Oh, right, she said, okay. So we did the entire balance. we went back to a number of different ages in her life. And with 3-in-1 concepts, you have an emotional thing, they call it the behavioral barometer. You can touch into how people might have been feeling at a particular age in the past. It's a wonderful tool helping people in that respect. So we got all sorts of emotional aspects about where she was at different ages and this and that and that, and this all linked to this one focus. And the whole way through, I had no idea what we were working on at all. And we did a lot of different ages and things. And at the end of it, she was fully balanced and no more work to do, no stress from the session, and thank you very much. She turned around and said, "I've no idea how you could do that." I said, "Well, I don't do it, you do. You know, it's your subconscious doing the work." She said, "It was extraordinary." I said, "Oh." She said, "I'll now tell you what we were doing." I was a bit surprised because it was so personal. And she said, "We were working on my marriage." She said, "You took me back to when I met my husband. You took me back to when we got engaged. You took me back to when we got married. You took me back to when we had our first child. You took me back to when he had his first affair. You took me back to when I had my second child. You took me back to when I had my first affair." And on it went. And she said, what was extraordinary was at each age we went to, the emotional stuff of that barometer of yours was spot on with what was going on in our lives. She said, it was extraordinary. And I thought, well, that is quite a fun example of how amazing this process is when you're using MRT to get into what the client wants to work on. And you, the kinesiologist, don't need to know. In fact, it's sometimes better if you don't, because you don't make any assumptions. You can just keep balancing. So that was an unusual one. But she went away very convinced that kinesiology was a very sound way of working.
Good. That's a good example. So it's our 30th anniversary, which is our Pearl anniversary. And we're hoping that you'll have a pearl of wisdom that you can share with us in another video that people can go and check out. But could you give us an idea? Have you got an idea of a pearl of wisdom that you would like to share with us in that way?
Well, but there is something that has made a huge change to the balances, the kinesiology balances that I give people. And to keep that brief, alongside my work with dyslexia people, you know, and balancing people with kinesiology, alongside that, I was also running psychology workshops in businesses, all sorts of businesses at boardroom level, wherever, cognitive psychology concepts, which in a nutshell explain what's going on at the conscious and subconscious level between the ears. And that understanding gave people the confidence to stretch their goals to a more aspirational goal and understand how to move from the comfort zone they were in, going back to comfort zones, to make sure they had created the comfort zone that would underpin the new them that they wanted to be, the new performance they wanted to achieve. And I'd been doing that for a long, long time, 20 years or more, before the penny dropped. Because with my kinesiology balances, the subconscious stretches the goal, and your balance clears out the resistance, and then it leaves them there. I went, if I could incorporate the psychology concepts, they would then understand how to make the change in a comfortable way. So I did a bit of research, came up with some concepts that I wanted to try and introduce. And what is extraordinary, there are 32 concepts. And when I'm balancing someone, what's so clever is the client's subconscious almost kind of scans that list and says, okay, I need to understand about that, and that, please, to understand what's going on and how to get rid of it. So the muscle testing, they pick the concepts they need to understand, and then they also now understand how to make the progress they want. So that would be, that has transformed the way I work with kinesiology.
Brilliant. So you'd be able to show us some techniques?
I can absolutely, I'd love to demonstrate if it's possible with someone, but in these times that might be difficult. But I've got all sorts of examples and quotes, and I won't say more now, but there's
brilliant. Yeah,
there's a book and there are workshops and there's all sorts of games that would help people understand.
We'll put a link up for that in with the description for this video. So thank you so much for your time, Jeremy. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today.
I hope it shows that I'm still passionate about it. I still love it because it's And I want to sort of spread the word and get more people aware, not just of kinesiology, and you may be cross with me here. I want more and more people to be aware of what muscle response testing will do.
Yeah.
Because it's not in the coaching world yet. Why not?
Yeah.
It's wonderful. Nice to talk to you.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Have a great anniversary.
We will do. Thank you. Thank you for giving us an anniversary to have.
It's been great fun.
Thank you.